What's up? Welcome to Place of Assembly, the podcast where we look at the role of physical space in cultural production, produced by H0L0 NYC in partnership with Experimental Sound Studio Chicago and 8 Ball Radio. Today we are joined by the indefatigable co-host Charlie Looker. What's up, Charlie?
What's up, Sam? How you doing, man? I'm glad you had me on this.
Yeah, man. Yeah, I can't imagine who else would have joined me. We're gonna have Justin Murphy on today of Other Life and Indie Thinkers, podcaster. He's got this online community going, a little kind of like university. This dude has a lot going on the internet, and today we're asking the question: is the internet a real place? What do you think Justin's gonna say about whether or not the internet is a real place?
I feel like yes would probably be his, his thing. I mean, real. Yeah. I don't think he gets super crazy on that. Like, what is real? We don't live in the real. We live in the hyper real. That kind of thing. That like 80s postmodern, quote unquote. Like, yeah, I don't think he's on that vibe. I think he probably is going to say that it is real.
Yeah. I second that. So let's, with no further ado, Justin Murphy, let's chop it up.
Yo, what's up?
What's up, guys?
Yo. What's up, Justin?
Charlie Looker, on my left. Justin Murphy, what's up?
Glad to be here.
Good. Welcome to Place of Assembly. So I'm going to dive right in and put the Place of Assembly question to you, which is, what is the craziest or most intense, or it could be most complex, hectic, whatever event, in person, IRL, or online that you've ever been a part of in any capacity, but in a capacity where you had some kind of a role, like you were giving a paper, you were participating, you had organized it, something like this, not an event where you were just in attendance.
I know what he's going to say.
Answer.
I know what he's going to say, and I'm fucking bummed I missed it anyway. Yeah.
You know this story? All right, let's see.
Maybe not.
Let's see if this is the story you know of. I might have talked about it before, but I don't think I've talked about it many times. You're going to like this, Sam. So the episode that comes to my mind is back in the day when I used to live in a crazy kind of communist like art warehouse back in Philly. Shout out to the Ox was the name of the place. For a couple of years in Philly, it was kind of like the premier DIY music space because it was massive, way bigger than any other place in the city. In any event, just with that as background, we used to do a bunch of different kinds of events. And one that I'll never, ever forget, which to this day just holds so much kind of sociological and anthropological insight in my mind and memory. We did a Halloween party once where we advertised on the flyers and the Facebook events and all of that kind of stuff. We advertised that there was going to be a real animal sacrifice. And we were very sincere. Well, we took it very seriously. We signaled that we were very sincere about it. So there was no indication that we were joking, and we really advertised it seriously as such. And on the day of the party, what we actually did was we decided we were not going to actually do an animal sacrifice. We actually considered we considered it. We talked it over, but we ultimately decided it would be too crazy to do that. In part just for reasons of hygiene and stuff. It would just be insane and crazy. And we weren't up for that, and probably some other ethical compunctions, but we decided against it, but we did decide we wanted to follow through on the idea, at least in some way. And so what we did was, we actually went to the Chinese market and we bought a bunch of like chicken's feet, I think, and then put it into this like bin with like fake blood, basically. But the night of the party, we used to have huge shows. So it was like, imagine a few hundred people, like more than a few hundred, actually, probably 500 people, something like that. We told everyone, all right, the animal sacrifice is going to begin now. And we actually like brought out this kind of cage thing, basically, that was covered and cloaked, basically. And we did it very solemnly. Like it was slow and dark and silent. And we told everyone, like, all right, we're coming out with the animal and we're going to do the animal sacrifice now. Dude, it was so in the silence of everyone of us walking out with this cage, everyone thought we were going to do it, and it felt like we were going to do it. So for all intents and purposes, it was the vibe of a legit and like ritualistic animal sacrifice. And a few things jumped out about the experience. One was that people were like, we thought people were going to be kind of like against it or trying to stop us, like vegetarians and stuff like that. And people were kind of like entranced by the ceremony in a way, like the whole crowd kind of like fell in line basically in a very strange and eerie way. And then when we actually brought out the cage and we were like on the mount, we actually had it. We had this like mount kind of thing, kind of like an altar, I guess. And once we were up there, someone started a chant. I forget what they said exactly, but it was something like, do it, or like kill it, or like, it was something crazy and intense. And the whole room, I kid you not, was chanting like really, really loud. And it was escalating to basically like consummate this animal sacrifice that was planned. And it was one of the creepiest things I've ever been a part of. I'll never forget it. Just the way that like the collective bloodlust kind of like formed and came to a crescendo. And in retrospect, I'm really glad we didn't actually have an animal prepared, because we probably would have been possessed by the group dynamic, and we probably would have had to do it. So I'll never ever forget that ceremony or that event, because the whole crowd was basically hypnotized into wanting to kill an animal. It was absolutely fascinating.
But what happened to the chicken feet and the blood and all that? Like, how did that come into it?
I think in the final analysis, it was something like it was open. It was, what did we do? It was like, I think, oh, you know what we did? And so like, then they kind of like, started hitting the piñata, and the piñata exploded with like chicken's feet and blood, but it wasn't an actual animal sacrifice. And actually, I remember people were very let down. It was actually kind of a bad move in a way, because we built up the hype so much and people were so absorbed by it. And then it was kind of a letdown, actually. So maybe that's a little bit of advice there for people who do events. If don't promise an animal sacrifice unless you're gonna deliver, because people will get hopped up on it. And it was like not people who are like sick and dark, violent people. It was like, I think mostly the people were kind of against the idea or skeptical or like dubious of it. But the way that they all kind of got like pulled into it was absolutely striking from an anthropological perspective.
Just because like it threw into relief that if you actually just stepped into the space of like, I'm going to do this, then people will just follow suit. And there's just something within them that's just like ready for that.
It's a few things. I think one, it's the fact that we know from social research that when you are in large groups, your sense of responsibility decreases. So that's well known and pretty well demonstrated. And I think that's absolutely a part of it. None of those people would have actually killed a chicken on their own if they were the one stabbing the knife. But if the whole group is kind of rooting for it, then you might as well. You're not really responsible. The second thing is, I think it's also just a kind of Girardian story. This is just the kind of mimetic desire. It's like everyone else wants it, so you want it. And I think there's that kind of lust for a scapegoat, even if it's like a totally arbitrary situation that's been concocted out of nowhere. And of course, this chicken is meaningless. And of course, there's no like actual culture that, makes sense out of this ritual. Nonetheless, I think we all do kind of carry around a kind of residual quotient of bloodlust just to take out on, any symbol that we can imagine is the fault of why we're not getting everything that we want. Even if it doesn't make any sense, it's very easy for us to latch on to that bloodlust against a random scapegoat if the group converges on it.
Well, this is I
wonder if they're, but go ahead.
Well, I was going to say we're talking about the internet today, and this is definitely a good setup for a discussion about the internet. But Charlie, what were you going to say? Sorry.
I was gonna say, I wonder if there would have been actually less bloodlust if it had been a different demographic, like if it had not been like an indie punk DIY crowd, if it had been a crowd that like regularly watches like MMA or whatever, they'd be like, yeah, all right, kill the, you know what I'm saying? Because it's like there's like that kind of DIY culture, that kind of living in a punk house culture. There's like violence is the most transgressive, out there thing.
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't know how does that go down on the internet? Ritual sacrifice like that?
Cancellation. Oh yeah, people do it all the time.
Cancellation. Yeah, it's called cancellation.
Yeah, it's great fun for people.
Right. Well, let's not go. That's a whole other podcast. But yeah. So Justin of Other Life, I actually don't normally do this. The whole like tell us about what you do thing. Do you know what I mean? But in your case, it's like pretty vast, and the things that you have going on kind of add up to like a position wherein we can pose this question, like, is the internet a real place? So I think it would be edifying and beneficial for everybody and for this discussion if you kind of just gave an overview of what you do, Other Life, Indie Thinkers, et cetera. Just kind of, if you can give us the elevator pitch on what you have going on, and we can kind of take it from there.
Yeah, sure. Happy to do that. So, I mean, look, I'm a social scientist, basically. That's all I am. It's all I ever have been. I got my PhD in 2014, was lucky enough to get an academic job, was a professor for like almost 6 years, decided to leave academia just because it kind of increasingly felt like a sinking ship. And I was doing quite well. Actually, I was kind of a rising star in my department, in my subfield. And I just decided that it was increasingly kind of impossible to tolerate. And also at the same time, my audience on the internet was growing just from me writing what I think and exploring my ideas more freely. So it's kind of like, to me, it was just a clear picture of where the winds were blowing. And I decided I was young enough and had enough piss and vinegar to stake out on my own and try a massive kind of career reorientation as a full-time, just independent person, thinking, writing, creating on the internet, and finding a way to monetize that. So I did that. I set out on that adventure about 2 years ago now. It's been about 2 years. And pretty much since then, what I decided to do, my whole vision was basically just, I'm going to take the functions that I was providing as a professor within the university, and I'm going to translate them into internet equivalents, basically. And I just had a deep inner conviction that it was possible to do that now more than ever. And that's been the adventure for the past 2 years, basically. So I did a whole bunch of different experiments, kind of testing different hypotheses about what this would look like or what would work. And after 2 years, I'm pretty proud to say I think I've really narrowed it down and have a pretty workable model. So I mean, I'm now living completely off of my various incomes that come through my independent internet work. And briefly, the way I would just summarize what it looks like is we do a few different things. One is I run a private membership community, which is called indiethinkers.org. And so it's a serious thing that with a lot of features and benefits that come with it. It's also not cheap. It's for a very specific type of person, which is someone pursuing long-term serious intellectual work. So it's basically, in other words, like my grad students who I was supervising as a professor. There's a new type of grad student basically on the internet who wants to write a book or wants to do serious research and develop a serious body of work on the internet, but they don't want to go through institutions anymore. They don't need a PhD. They don't really want a PhD. They just want to do work. They want to do it freely and they want to do it successfully and they want to build an audience and make it sustainable. But they just like me as a professor, they just want to avoid the institutions and avoid academia. So I've poured everything I was doing for my grad students pretty much into this like internet-based system. That's not about credentials and it's not about any of that stuff. It's just about the basic structures and systems that a person needs to do that work successfully over time. So we can go into that if you're curious, but I'll leave it kind of shallow at that. So that membership community, Indie Thinkers, basically just packages up a lot of the functions I was doing as a professor in the supervisory function, helping grad students pursue their own intellectual careers, but this time on the internet instead of academia. And then we do online courses in philosophy. I hope to expand that to social science and some other things, but at the moment we're kind of focusing on philosophy. So I do that in collaboration with other lecturers. So we have a course on Leo Strauss. We have a course on George Bataille. We have a course on we have one in June coming out on René Girard. We have one on Deleuze and Heidegger. and and we have one on Carl Jung as well. So I've been just rolling those out, and people really like them. And those are the main things that I monetize with. That's the main kind of like business operation. And then what grows the audience and brings people into my fold is all the free stuff that I put out, which is mostly my writing through a blog and newsletter, the podcast, Other Life, and the YouTube channel also. So that just grows my audience, brings people in. And then for the small number of people who are working on these kind of more serious topics, if they want to join one of my various operations, they can pay a bit of money and participate. And it seems to all work out pretty well so far. It's growing, and I think I'm going to be able to build a whole life quite well doing this.
Amazing. So, all right, so the thing that I want to like, the first thing, I mean, everything that you said there, I want to follow up on in some way or another. But the thing that like is most like fascinating to me is why do you think it is that there is enough interest in spaces like this on the internet to sustain a business doing something that historically would have been catered to by the university at a time? I was talking to Charlie about this, but before the show, at a time in history when more people than ever are going to college, there's more and more pressure than ever to go to college. And you know, it's like, you'd think that would all be soaked up by the institution. And yet it almost seems like if your practice can function as evidence, it almost seems like the opposite is happening, where, or not, maybe not entirely, but in certain areas or something, it has the opposite effect, where there's like an intellectual thirst or like an interest in doing certain kinds of work that is not addressed by the academy, such that someone like yourself could make like a little like cottage industry out of providing these services to people.
Yeah, totally. I think the basic answer to your question is just that all of the mainstream institutions are now just completely saturated with fakeness and dishonesty and deception. It's really that simple. It's like our mainstream institutions are now kind of Soviet level, kind of self and other deception. It's just like really, really, really bad. And it's very easy to normalize it, you know, just like people in the Soviet Union normalized it, and at a certain point didn't even necessarily even appreciate how bad it got. When you're swimming in it and that's all you know, it's kind of easy to say, oh, it's not that bad. Yeah, sure. We tell each other little lies here and there, but that's just the nature of institutional life. You know, there's all different types of excuses you can come up with, but the fact of the matter is it really is just completely saturated with nonsense and dishonesty and deception, that it's fundamentally suffocating. So that if you actually do remember what the true intellectual life tastes like or feels like, you know, you just can't do it. You just can't go along with it anymore. And I believe that for people who really have that intellectual vocation, which by the way is nothing so pretentious, it's just, you know, there's a specific type of person that really needs to read and write and think at the outer limits of what they're capable of thinking, as honestly and as incisively as they're capable of it. There's just a certain type of person who really needs that constitutionally. For that type of person, you just can't get it inside the institutions anymore. And so you'll get it wherever you possibly can. And if that means, you know, going on the internet, then that's completely fine. It's better than going along with what just feels to increasing numbers of people, like completely unsustainable kind of reign of fakeness and deception, basically, is all there is to it, I think.
Word, unsustainable reign of fakeness and deception. I admire that construction.
And by the way, it's not even like political. Like people talk about political correctness, but that's in a lot of ways a misnomer. It's just like generalized bureaucratized nonsense. It's like bureaucratic disingenuousness that is the real problem. It's not even like it's not even political. Like, oh yeah, every professor has to be like a radical left-wing communist. Like that's significantly it's like everything you do as a grad student or a professor, all the meetings that you're in, all the stuff that you're talking about has to be like run through this like filter of bureaucratic signaling that just doesn't make sense, and everyone knows it doesn't make sense. So it's much more mundane actually than political, what people have in mind when they talk about political correctness.
Yeah, I recently learned that word apparatchik. It's very useful to me. Like, yeah, I don't know.
Tell us what does that word mean?
Cog and just cog in a bureaucratic machine. Just some like company man person who just like can push his papers. Just some bureaucrat for like the Stalinist kind of situation or whatever.
Yeah, I mean, an example I use for my memory as a professor. It's like it's very mundane stuff. It doesn't seem that bad. It's not like sinister. It's in the department meetings you talk about like learning goals or whatever. Each course is supposed to have specific learning goals. And then, you're supposed to put those learning goals on the syllabus. And then at the end, you're supposed to check to see if you've satisfactorily delivered the learning goals of the course. And it's just like, it just doesn't work like that. It's never worked like that. It can't work like that. It's not the nature of education. It's not the nature of thinking. And yet all of these things you have to do, which everyone knows and everyone will talk about at the bar as being just like completely fake and made up. You have to do them anyway. You have to say them anyway. And at a certain point, when 90% of your life and what you're doing on a daily basis is like saying these words and referring to these things that aren't real, the destruction that this has on your cognition, on your ability to think clearly about how the world actually operates, is it's a truly existential threat to the thinking mind. I mean, you can't tell yourself a bunch of mundane lies and made up things that make no sense and also maintain a mind that is capable of discovering original insights and expressing them clearly. You just can't. And so at a certain point, you realize like I think we are actually at this point now where you actually do have to decide, do you want to think as clearly as possible and discover the greatest truths you're capable of discovering and expressing them to the maximum of your capability? Or do you want some little modicum of institutional recognition and social status that like your grandmother will recognize as like a job title? Like which one of those two do you want? You really do have to kind of choose because they're increasingly mutually exclusive is my position.
Charlie, maybe
it's also joy too.
Go ahead.
What were you going to say? Because I was just going to say that there's like, I mean, it's like not only does this kind of thing you're talking about stifle the real intellectual life, it's just joy. I mean, it's like a joyless realm. And I mean, as miserable as the internet is, it's also a very joyful place. And like, I mean, especially, with YouTube, to be approaching serious work through YouTube, it's like that to be approaching that in the same place, you just enjoy the dumbest shit is actually, see, I don't know if that makes it more or less of a place, we're talking about placehood, is that more porous boundary between seriousness and play. Does that make it less of a place or more of a place? Like how bounded is this? Are the boundaries to your zone more or less porous, than a
physical place,
than a physical brick and mortar, universe? Yeah, I don't know. Yeah.
It's a good question. I suspect they would have to be more porous. I think that's, yeah, I mean, I think there are a lot of drawbacks too, for sure. I mean, I think the internet-based places, if you will, are really only a stopgap. They're a kind of transitional phase to bring a lot of these communities offline again, is kind of how I think about it. So it's like, I think there's an obvious superiority to in-person communities. It's just for many kind of obvious reasons. There's a lot that's unique and having real in-person physical location specific communities and connection to physical interactions and also physical places. But I think what's going on is that all of the focal points in kind of the brick and mortar world, all the buildings, the university campuses, the art galleries, oh my God, it's like that's even worse, with the exception of cool independent places like places like you guys roll in. But like the institutionalized physical world is just so captured. All of those places are so fully captured that you have to go onto the internet to regroup. But I do think a longer term effect of that is going to be the best internet communities are just going to start rebuilding their own physical places for sure. I'm already starting to think about it. I'm already starting to kind of play around with it. And I think so. So I think that's just the next step.
Interesting. Something that you said earlier, which I parroted back to you, which is the unsustainable reign of fakeness and deception, which I'm stuck on. I think, but more broadly, everything that you were saying about the conditions in the university and whatnot, and this is what I was going to say, Charlie, like you could weigh in and let me know what you think about this as well. I experience those types of antics and structures emerging in every kind of formerly kind of pillar type institutional part of life, not just in academia, but like in the art world, in the music world. There is like, I mean, the sort of way the music game is played now versus, let's say, 20 years ago or 15 years ago. Like 15 years ago would have been about when Charlie, you and I were first kind of like getting our legs, you know what I mean? I think the construction unsustainable reign of fakeness and deception is like pretty apt, you know, in the sense that there's this kind of like map precedes the territory attitude about like basically everything that gets done. And I mean, this is something like Charlie, you and I have like riffed on this a bunch, but it's like where people are kind of like projecting this thing into the world that then is supposed to happen. And it never really quite comes together, but everybody goes to the events every way and sort of like, anyway, and sort of like stamps this passport and like says that they did it. But like the sort of image that's projected like dominantly through the internet, like versus what's actually taking place in lived physical space and experience actually doesn't really match up or congeal. And like movements wherein there was a really pronounced like ethos and like set of values that kind of like checked out with the experience, like, you know, like punk or, you know, like early disco or hip hop or techno, are kind of like increasingly more like unimaginable in our present moment, kind of like because of this sort of fakeness and deception. But Charlie, is this resonating with you, or should I be more specific, or like, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, well, I know what you're talking about in these certain cases of like certain types of very contemporary like hyped up stuff where you like someone's first show is something where everyone got a free ticket and some people were even like paid to be there, and you get the Instagram shots of like a huge crowd and then it like looks like the person's big or whatever, like shit like that. But I don't know though. I mean, when we were coming up, we were just like, we aren't trying to have careers. Like, I mean, we were just like, we are these art warrior monk people who just, you know what I'm saying? I mean, we were just on some like, this is some cloistered cult shit. But weirdly, our whole thing was like, well, the fallback plan is eventually we're going to go into academia. True. Like we actually viewed, do you remember that? I feel like we looked at academia as like this fallback.
Well, it used to be that academia used to be that place where you could go if you didn't get some real job. If you were smart and capable, that's what it used to be. And it was cool back then when it was just like a place you could go if you didn't feel like getting a real job. But over time that becomes unsustainable because then it fills up with the wrong kind of people. But yeah, I mean, what you're saying, I'm not a musician, but I'm kind of adjacent enough to music scenes to know what you guys are talking about, I think. And I think what happens in art as well as in, the other life is things are always moved fundamentally by a relatively small minority of movers and shakers, the people that are really, committed to a craft and on a very specific line of flight that in the short term only they see, but they're obsessed with it. And then all of a sudden, they're like making these waves and a scene emerges around it, or it creates this kind of more public scene ethos or image. But then you always, you get a lot of people who don't necessarily have that very specific, unique, compelling, creative angle or creative output, who will just make events to signal that they're kind of part of something. Or there'll be a lot of this, I think what you were referring to, Sam, of people basically trying to kind of project what they want to be or what they want to bring into the world without necessarily having the goods, just kind of hoping that it'll come through enough projection. I think that's I think persistent in lots of domains. The question is, where do people go? The people who are the real deal, where do they go and what do they do? So in my world, for a long time, if you were like really a really sophisticated thinker and you wanted to make your dent on the world through, writing books about how the world works or something like that, being a professor was the natural path, and it's just not anymore. And I think that's one of the fundamental transitions that we're going through. I don't know as much about the world of music. It might be an interesting conversation if you guys want to have it, whether or not, I mean, it seems like the same change is happening in the world of music, right? Like if I was like 17 or 18 and I was like really, really wanted to make it in music, wouldn't I probably be most rational to just work all day making music and uploading to SoundCloud at the highest volume possible? Like, isn't that kind of the winning strategy right now, at least in rap, let's say? It does seem that that's structurally the same exact kind of change or transition that I'm marking in academia, but in a different domain. Is this true across the board? Is this true only in some cases that you can see, or are there important limitations on that, or how do you guys see it?
Definitely for rap, no question. Rap and techno and stuff. Although techno kind of has to be live as well, I suppose. But
yeah, I mean,
don't young indie rock bands? I mean, don't they still do the touring and shit? Anyway, yeah.
Yeah, no. I mean, I think that basically the answer is yes. Like in certain communities, it's SoundCloud. In certain communities, it's Bandcamp, like or other platforms. However, there's one really important difference, which is that it's never been the case, except for in very, very rarefied circles, that the university would have been a way to fast track your musical career in America. Like the history of American music is dominated by people without musical degrees, so we're in this, I think that we're in a certain sense, we're in like a parallel kind of process, but like, I think in what I would liken to, or what I would say in our world plays the analogous role that the university plays in the world of intellectual pursuit, right? Would be essentially like media companies, right? Like radio stations, television stations, record companies, internet platforms,
Labels,
but also periodicals, NPR, right. Things, Pitchfork, MTV, things like this, right? I think like the way historically that you would advance your career as a musician, and I mean, Charlie, like weigh in if you disagree, but like the way historically that you would advance your career as a musician would be by seeking to gain access to platforms with greater visibility within the community that you sought to reach. And then through that visibility would come more opportunity and like therefore a career that allowed you to do your work and continue to produce, right? I do think that there is a crisis in relationship to those platforms. And I do think that people are recognizing that. And let me just a little bit more about that crisis. I think the crisis is that the way in which people would pursue that path has become too narrow. There's essentially like 5 to 7 dominant platforms where if they don't sign off on your project, it's not going to happen at a certain level, right? And I think that there is a realization that there needs to be other outlets and other avenues, and there are people doing things that that take on the qualities that your work, Justin, possesses. But I think that process in music is less evolved, because I think that like among musicians, there's still, that dream is still alive. I'm going to get an 8 on Pitchfork. I'm going to get Best in New Music. I'm going to get the New York Times Review. I'm going to have a featured track on NPR. I'm going to play a Tiny Desk concert, and then get booked on festivals and like whatever. I think that dream is maybe more alive. Can
I ask you a question? Yeah. I mean, my sense is that across the board in different domains, what's happening is that the actual effect of that stamp of approval is decreasing. Do you see that as being true in music, or is it not? Because in other words, like getting that high rating on Pitchfork or whatever, like is the actual impact of that decreasing? Because my sense is that it is.
I think it can have a huge effect or not at all. I think in some cases you get an 8.6 and you buy a house. In other cases, you get an 8.6 and it's just a fart in a windstorm. You know, it just like doesn't matter. I think it, right?
Yeah. I mean, my theory would be that it can maybe help a little bit if you're already organically blowing up. Then yeah, it could be a little extra kind of boost in your sales. But it doesn't make or break anyone anymore, I don't think. And that's crucial. And I think also what's going on is that those institutional filtering mechanisms are now increased. They themselves are captured by larger political forces that are just very orthogonal to like what people actually like listening to or what people consider quality or whatever. So it's like, you see this, I think, across the board of these different subdomains, whether it's, the books that make it onto like the New York Times bestseller list, which actually is not even indexed to number of copies sold. Like it's literally people's friends and stuff. They get discretion over what goes on the bestseller list. It sounds like it would be an index of best selling, and it's not even that, right? So I think you see that with many different institutional endorsement mechanisms. They just don't have the effect they used to have, in part because they've become so noisy that people just don't take that kind of endorsement or recommendations that seriously anymore. Whereas what they actually take seriously is what to their own ears sounds like fire, or what their friends that they actually respect say sounds like fire. And that is everything now, I think. And it's what it looks like to me anyway.
Yeah. I mean, I'll jump in there and say, from the point of view of running the venue, man, like at this point, when people send me like electronic press kits that's like so-and-so played this festival and here's this Pitchfork review, I almost look at that as like less legit because like when I get some crispy fucking really put together graphic design hyperlinks out of a PDF, and it's all this flossy shit from like periodicals that I've heard of and festivals that I've heard of, the way it makes me feel like, why are you going to such great lengths to impress upon me that this is somehow like prescient and I should fuck with it? It's like, if that were true, A, I'd already know about this. And B, like you probably, the people who really have it, like the people who are just gonna sell out and they know it, send me one-line emails. Do you know what I'm saying? They don't send me like a bunch of fucking extra shit. And yeah, I mean, absolutely. And to your point, like what I have found works at the venue is this more local, kinetic, like this is what this group of people is like talking about together, like in real time, in person. And like things that have that kind of like kinetic, like local effervescent energy will do great at the venue. And something that's just like, oh, people are going to know about this because all of these press periodical blah, blah, blah have like covered it, almost never works on its own. Do you know what I mean? So I would say, yes, absolutely. That shit is like,
totally. Exactly. This is like a revolutionary structural change. I mean, it's easy to kind of like, people sometimes use euphemisms that are kind of corny and it kind of understates the case. People will talk about like the importance of authenticity on, the internet culture. You have to be authentic to get a following or whatever. But it's like, that sounds kind of corny, but it's really true in way. It's just like, and I think fundamentally making certain former mechanisms of power and influence and culture and the arts just fundamentally obsolete. Like I think probably in 10 or 20 years, the idea of like a PR agent is going to die. Like that's not even going to be a thing, because exactly what you're saying, Sam, it's like this whole previously existing channel of influence and power of, making your fancy brochures and getting it into the right, inboxes and getting the right people to endorse it. Like that all of those mechanisms are decreasing in power. I think to an extreme degree. And I think it's a beautiful thing, but I think it just raises huge questions about what does it mean now to be a writer? What does it mean now to be a theorist? What does it mean to be a thinker or an author or a musician? And it's like, I think honestly, even those of us who are still who are pretty internet savvy, we still underestimate how drastic this change is and how much it really requires like a complete overhaul of how we think about cultural production and what we're doing with our lives, or what we're choosing to spend time on, what we're choosing not to spend time on. And I mean, maybe this is a segue back to your interest in space and place, because one of the things I'm realizing as I go deeper into this like model of the world that I'm increasingly convinced of, I think one of the things you're going to see is increasing investment in private communities. And when I say investment, what I mean by this is like, if you look at indie thinkers, for instance, this private community I'm leading, like one of my observations, thinking that they want to grow their audience, they want to build an audience, like a public audience, right? And we have like some resources in the community that help people do that, explain how you should think that through and the trade-offs involved, and some practical stuff to actually build a public audience. But what is really interesting to me that I'm starting to realize is that internet, but the really important thing that actually it's going to be is it's going to be your own audience internally. Because we're going to be able to, as we scale it, as more and more smart, awesome people are in indie thinkers, you're going to actually be less worried about how do I get some random stranger to sign up to my Bandcamp or follow me on SoundCloud or whatever. And you're going to be more interested in like, how can I make fire work that the people, the 1,000 or 2,000 or 10,000 people in this private community are going to like? Because I know them, I can connect with them, that we're a similar type of people. And if I can make one thing that like 20 people in my friend group really fucking love, like they actually like it, they're listening to it, they're telling their friends about it because they can't get enough of it. That's a higher probability path to larger scale cultural success than convincing like 10,000 stranger people who to follow you or click like, you know what I mean? So I actually think there's going to be returning ROI to going all the deeper into private communities and just being like being the most beloved creator or musician or writer or whatever in your group of like 100 people who all fuck with each other. Like I think that's actually a more reliable springboard into the public culture than going after the public culture.
Yeah, I mean, something I I just thought about just as we were talking that never occurred to me is like, what you're doing, Justin, it's like you aren't yet, or maybe it won't go this way, but like by sort of starting this essentially university, I mean, it's not whatever, like it's a bunch of course, like a community of professors. You aren't awarding degrees that give people like power in the world. You know what I mean?
Right.
So it's kind of like what you're saying internally. It's like the power is just within itself. I mean, I wonder if there will be a turning point where like having like it might be a turning point that you're like, oh, you graduated from Other Life University, like you have a degree, you know what I mean? It's like it's like exactly what you're trying to avoid, or not avoid, but it's exactly like not the point.
I just think it's obsolete. That's obsolete. It's a waste of time to try to solve that problem. And a lot of people are stuck on that. A lot of the people are thinking, what comes after the university? How do we solve these problems of the university? I mean, everyone knows the university is in very, very bad shape, just all around. A lot of people know that. And I think there's a lot of smart people trying to think about what comes next or trying to create what will replace it. And I think one of the biggest mistakes they make is getting hung up on this, on some of the reasons that we're talking about. It's like, what gets influence and power is no longer as endorsement decreasing at the same time that authentic word of mouth is going like mega scale. So I just think punt on that question altogether.
Yeah.
An interesting.
I mean, more internal stuff it makes it feel like more of a place.
Yeah, sorry, Charlie. It's a little bit of a delay, so I don't mean to be interrupting you. But like an interesting parallel there, where Charlie, like you're talking about like, will there be a point where it's like you've graduated from Other Life University, or not, it's obviously not going to take on that form, but it's like you've had this experience, or you've been a part of this, and then that will come to take on some value in the world, right? Like we kind of saw the same thing go down with punk and DIY, in the sense that like in the very, very early days of those scenes, there was nothing to have other than, you know, the respect of your peers who are also part of that scene.
Yeah, respect of people who are in it. Yeah, respect to people who are in it. That's it. Yeah.
And then as you move
Right.
further into
But that is,
well, yeah, let me finish. Sorry, I think there's a little choppiness on the internet, but like as you move further
Please.
down that path, those
yeah.
the record labels and whatnot who emerged out of those communities did come to sort of perform the function that you're describing, wherein if you got on Warp or if you got on Sub Pop, right, this is like a huge like gateway into much larger opportunities. Do you know what I mean? But all of those things share that common origin in a community that began much like the one that Justin is describing.
Right. That's right. But I do think you're seeing even that function disappear increasingly, though. You know, will it go away completely? I don't know. Maybe there'll be some domains in which it still makes sense. But, you know, you're now at the point where you see more and more musicians who, if they blow up big enough on SoundCloud, you know, they'd rather not hitch their wagon to someone else's supposedly bigger thing. They're just going to take their own thing to the moon. I think you're already starting to see that with people like Chance the Rapper or whatever. I think you're going to see you're going to see it way more. I think.
Yeah, no, word. So this kind of like, this is somewhat of a pivot, but I think this kind of ties back into what we're talking about. I was peeping one of your podcasts with Niederhauser. I think it was about the Heidegger Deleuze course. And you guys, what I understood, I wasn't part of the course and I didn't see the courses that were available to, you know, watch after the fact. But you guys, what I was able to ascertain, were kind of riffing after you did this course. And you were just sort of talking about the experience of doing it and wrapping it up. And one of the things that you specifically addressed was that though people were coming and paying this kind of like tiered subscription to be like at different levels of membership in this course and whatnot, and there was like a dynamic of exchange and like a transactional dynamic, both of you felt that the work that was being done in the course, and I think you kind of said that this had largely to do with the fact that nobody was getting anything from this other than the edification of like the learning in the course, but that the work that was being done in the course eluded like a dynamic of capture, like capitalist capture. Like it didn't just become this commodity of like desire and, you know, I want this, you know, it somehow transcended that. And I was wondering if you would talk more about that. Like, what is it about that work that you're doing that you feel succeeds at eluding capture in that way?
Yeah, totally. Happy to talk about that. Well, there's this long running critique of what is often called instrumental labor. Yeah, Charlie knows what I'm talking about. And Frankfurt School, and really actually a whole lot of 20th century philosophy really kind of revolves around this problem of instrumental rationality, which is, you know, pretty much it's what most people think of as the logic of capitalism, or just the kind of the contemporary mindset of what we consider to be rational, pretty much, which is where you think about what goal are you trying to accomplish, and then you think about the most sensible, rational means to accomplish that goal as efficiently as possible. That is a kind of rationality, but there are other kinds of rationality, like Max Weber, the sociologist, kind of the founder of modern sociologist. The founder of modern sociology kind of cataloged a bunch of different kinds of rationality, right? In primitive societies, you would often see what he calls things like ethical substantive rationality, which is where you have some kind of categorical value that you just don't negotiate no matter what. You'll die for it if you need to. It's not really instrumentally rational to, you know, go to war for some like particular symbol, let's say, but it could be rational in this kind of ethical, substantive sense. So anyway, without going too deep into that, there are different kinds of rationality, and what defines contemporary Western civilization is really the complete domination of society by instrumental rationality. There's really only one way of being rational nowadays that everyone recognizes. And if you deviate from this, you're kind of just seen as like either dumb or stupid or low status or whatever. And this is instrumental rationality. And, Max Weber referred to it famously as an iron cage. He believed that it would be something that Western civilization would maybe never be able to escape from, because one of the biggest problems with instrumental rationality is that once you get kind of wrapped up in the state of mind, hard to get out of it, because guess what? To get out of it, you kind of are already thinking of instrumentally rationally. How do I get out of this cage? What's the most instrumentally rational way to get out of this cage I'm stuck in? And so that's why Max Weber called it the iron cage of rationality that Western civilization would increasingly be stuck in the 20th century and beyond. And so that's a very, very real problem. It is arguably the most oppressive aspect of Western society in a way. Like when the Marxists and the kind of anti-capitalist people are really getting down on capitalism, the fact is capitalism is pretty damn good at like creating goods and services and, decreasing the cost of things. And it's actually really, really good in lots of material ways. But the way in which capitalism really, really is oppressive, where they're right, is this logic of instrumental rationality comes to suffocate every aspect of life. It's impossible to do anything or say anything or create anything with others in a way that is fulfilling in any register other than the domain of this instrumentally rational, and it makes me money. It gets me power. Like if it doesn't get you money or power in an instrumentally rational way, we don't do it anymore, and we can't even think about doing it anymore. We can't even talk about it or refer to it anymore. So it really does suffocate everything. Okay, so that's the background here. That's what I mean by instrumental rationality. What's very, very interesting about the university today, and comparing it to different types of online experiences that you can engineer, is that the university was historically, what made it so great was that it was this space that was insulated from market pressures. In other words, instrumental rationality. So what made the university wonderful was that you could spend a few years just reading books, talking about big ideas, art and science and philosophy, and you're not really trying to be instrumentally rational. You're trying to figure things out, get at the truth, and the truth is often not instrumentally rational. Like, why would you spend 4 years of your effort trying to figure out some abstract thing, or read like, the Odyssey or whatever? Like those things don't actually pay themselves off in any direct economic way. So they're not instrumentally rational. And so the university used to be this place where the space carved out away from instrumental rationality. Of course, what happened is it's now completely consumed by instrumental rationality, just like any of the other, institutions like big corporations or bureaucracies or whatever. And so to do a university degree, pretty much from the beginning to the end, all people are really thinking about, students that is they want to get the best marks, so they get the best degree, so they get the best job, and they're just trying to get equal returns from it. Well, guess what? That has a way of actually suffocating what the entire point of the university experience. It makes it structurally incapable it makes you structurally incapable of getting the damn thing that you hope to get or wanted to get or once upon a time could get, which is genuine edification, or it's been called many different things, right? Enlightenment, whatever you want to call it.
The good life.
But what's that?
The good life.
The good life, eudaimonia, whatever it might be. Well, guess what? Now you structurally cannot access it anymore in the universities. And the same thing holds true for professors, right? Career advancement, they're trying to get prestigious publications. It's all completely suffused with instrumentally rational logic. And this goes back to what we started this conversation with. It's just, this has become so saturated that you literally can't do the thing that you're supposed to do there. And guess what? On the internet now, it's actually more available to do this kind of thing than ever, precisely because the internet is a little weird, right? Justin's not offering you a degree, right? Justin's not offering you a credential. If you take one of Justin's philosophy courses, it's not going to get you a job as a philosophy professor. But in a way, that's a benefit for what I'm talking about, because since there's no instrumental payoff, the only people who sign up for this kind of stuff are the people who just want the pure, deep edification. And so it has a really, really kind of amazing effect of filtration, where the only people who come in are the people who actually understand that there are at least to them, there are values in this world that are higher than, getting a better job or whatever. And for that type of person, you will happily drop $500 for like an intensive, transformative 8-week experience where you read a bunch of books you've always wanted to, but could never find the time to talk about ideas you've always wanted to develop, but never knew anyone to develop them with. And yeah, so we have found, ironically, the internet is perhaps uniquely well suited for this unique type of experience and community interaction, precisely because we're not really able to offer anything else.
Well, that's why I feel like I got disillusioned, or maybe Sam, maybe you feel the same way, because I feel like we both decided to not apply to grad school, like sort of in tandem. It's like, I feel like I got disillusioned on grad school without even going, because when I thought it was a fallback plan, I thought of it as less instrumental and more substantive reasoning. I thought of it as like, oh, that's when you give up the hustle and you just go into the armchair, the pure thing. But then I started realizing, no, this is actually more of a hustle than hustling on online or hustling and touring. It's like actually more of a hustle, and it's nerds who aren't even like like in the uncool way. So it's like,
totally.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the grad school thing is so weird. I did go to graduate school briefly, and I quit in a very dramatic and bizarre way. I just one day did not go back, and I did not contact anyone or return my library books, which I continued to hear about for some years after that. But yeah, I mean, another thing about grad school and music is that it always, like, when you would be hanging with those cats, it's like a lot of those folks actually just want to be making records and out on the road doing what you're already doing. It's just kind of like, oh no, I thought you were like climbing some ladder that I was like hoping to get to, but it doesn't go down that way. But wait a minute, Justin, I want to see if I'm understanding your answer about eluding devices of capture. So the manner in which what you're doing eludes like devices of capture is that because the environment deprives you of the thing that the university promises, which is validation and prospects, in some like demonstrable, way that you could measure, right? It only attracts people who are there for the edification, and that effect, like across the group, delivers this environment that's very like sort of transcendent, because people have chosen against instrumental rationality, instead have chosen purely for their own enlightenment. You know what I mean? There's a sort of purity in intention.
Yeah, that's right. I think there might be a couple other elements that also feed in favorably to this, which is, for instance, we, like, the people who facilitate these courses, the lecturers and the people who kind of run the seminars, we are not judging in order to kind of select who's best and who's not, which is, what essentially grading is or marking is. And so that's another thing that I think is really, really good. It's like, all we really offer is we're going to give you some exclusive content that we've worked really hard to make really good and hopefully very informative and illuminating for you, lecture videos and transcripts and MP3s, however you want to consume the material we've made for the course that kind of defines the course content. And then we're going to jump on a call 2 hours at a time, once a week for about 8 weeks. And we're all going to talk as thinking adults. And there's nothing at the end of the tunnel that you get. If you're smarter than someone else, you don't get a cookie. If you're like politically incorrect, you don't get punished. It's just adults thinking about big questions honestly and directly, as if we're all just basically sovereign, legally independent individual adults. There are no tendencies or the instrumentally rational logic that I talked about. People don't have to worry about, oh, if I say something Justin disagrees with, is he going to give me a bad grade? None of that. It's just not there. There's no grade to give. If I say something that sounds really high status, is Justin more likely to recommend me for a job? None of that. It's just not there. And so it has this really, really favorable kind of purifying effect for a few different reasons, I guess.
Interesting. So again, this is a pivot, but how does another thing that I'm privy to that you're working on is the social token or social coin, like some incorporation of like blockchain technology into your community. This is the part of what you do that I know the least about. So can you tell us about that project and describe how it fits into the rest of what you're doing overall?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I would qualify this at the outset by saying that I'm very bullish on crypto in general, but I think when it comes to any specific project or form in which this is going to materialize, I think one has to be, reasonably skeptical, and it's just hard to know in advance what is actually going to be the winning, format or protocol or whatever. And there's a ton of crazy competition right now in terms of how like value in crypto to really penetrate larger society. So I like to start this off as a kind of caveat, because what this means is, because I'm very bullish on crypto in general, it means I just like to have my finger in a bunch of different things, because I want to learn. I want to be on the edge of it. I want to be on the bleeding edge of what's developing. And I want to just be involved in as many different things as possible, so that I can have the widest angle and see, oh, okay, I think this is going to be really big and grow. This is actually kind of a false start. That's not really worth paying attention to anymore, because it's massive and growing and really dynamic and super crazy, all the different types of projects. So with that as a caveat, one thing that is very interesting to me is the way that communities are using cryptocurrency, smart contract technology more broadly, to basically create their own forms of internal autonomous value creation, and also value kind of monitoring and value exchange. And so one thing that people are doing, which is quite interesting, is basically making their own tokens, which is basically just your own kind of branded cryptocurrency. There's now dozens of communities that are what you call a tokenized community, which basically just means to get into the community, you have to hold a certain amount of token. And then in the community, members kind of pay each other in that token. It's a way of incentivizing each other to do different types of things and to kind of create a kind of distributed governance structure. Now, I'm not necessarily super convinced that this is going to take over the world and every community is going to have its own token, and this is like really important for everyone to get on right now. That's not my message or pitch. I just think it's interesting. And there are at least a dozen or so internet communities that have their own token, and it's working. The value of that token is not trivial. It's on the open market. You can buy and sell that token with other tokens. And so it has real demonstrable value that's gradually increasing over time. So for people who are maybe deep in crypto, if anyone's listening to this and you're deep in crypto, there was in 2017, there was like this big bad hype cycle of basically token launches. It was called the ICO craze, the initial coin offerings. So back in 2017, everyone was selling a token. It was like, I have my own token, buy it for this amount. It's going to be great. The value shoots up way high. People who buy this token, like suddenly they all think they're millionaires. And then the value of it like completely drops to zero like a few days later, because a lot of them were scams. A lot of them were like hype. So there is this kind of sketchy history related to it. But now there's this new wave of people who have kind of learned the mistakes of the past and now are basically using cryptocurrency tokens to run communities, and it's working sustainably and quite impressively. So yeah, I'm interested in that. I was approached by one of the startups that's kind of offering this to creators. It's called Roll. You can check them out at roll.com, and thought I'd be a good fit. And generally, I'm just very bullish on crypto in general. So when people come to me with these types of proposals, I just kind of say, okay, if it's not too hard for me and it's free for me, I'm happy to experiment and try and see how far it goes. So yeah, thanks to Roll, I have my own branded ERC20 on the Ethereum blockchain. It's called Life. The hashtag or the cash tag, the ticker, if you will, is Life, $LIFE. And yeah, we're still just kind of getting it going. Like I said, I'm definitely not making a pitch to you or anyone else like, this is going to be amazing, it's going to make us all millionaires. I'm not saying anything like that. I'm just saying it's interesting. Some people are doing it well and responsibly, and it seems to be cool and exciting way to kind of create value and share value within a community. but it's early days, so I'm not quite sure where it's going to go. But I am working on it, and we do have a little community around the token. But I'm also interested in other weird things like Urbit, for instance. Like, I just think there's a lot of like very weird visionary types of experiments going on right now, and I'm of the opinion you should just kind of, you know, try to get involved in all of them, because you never know what's going to like really take over the world at this stage.
True. How do you imagine that, like, let's say that the token really took off, how would that find expression in your community? I mean, in this conversation, we've talked about indie thinkers, we've talked about your courses, we've talked about, you know, your podcast, which you kind of said is like what sort of brings people in, and then you've got your writing and your social media presence and everything. How would the presence of a token, which essentially is a form of currency within your community that's specific to your community, how does that function inside of the community, you know, to consolidate community or to expedite? Yeah.
Totally. Can I take a leak real quick and be back in like 2 minutes?
Yeah.
Can you guys talk while I'm gone?
Yeah, me and Liquor will riff, dude.
Absolutely,
all right, awesome.
Yeah.
BRB.
That's I was thinking about this. I know people are always talking about like not always, but just like secession, you know, like just this like the whole patchwork thing, you know, just the US crumbling or whatever, this kind of thing. But it's like people still talk about that in space, you know, in the physical space, but it's like if these communities, these like crypto communities, you know, sort of are like a form of like, you know, intentional community, like secession, you know, it's like, I wonder at what point is it just going to be like they have different laws? You know what I mean? Like at what point is it just going to be like different actual governance? Like that's going to be so crazy, but it's like not divided up in space, you know?
Right. Well, I mean, there are like extremely fringe groups that already argue that they have, you know, their own set of laws, you know, like the sovereign citizens. I mean, this is dominantly on the very, very far right, you know, but like the thing with the currencies in sorry, what's that?
You're just breaking up. That's all. Kirk.
Oh, sorry. The thing with the currencies that are specific to these online communities, it already has this like pre-modern vibe, you know, like before there was any kind of standardized currency or exchange rate, right? Like there's just all these like currencies that had nothing specific to do with one another. Do you know what I mean? So there's already this kind of like balkanizing of the internet, like in that way.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Justin, we were just talking about how like
yeah. I just like
No, go ahead.
Oh no, I mean I was just saying, you know, it's like this obviously the whole, you know, crypto, these crypto communities, it gets into that kind of like libertarian, like that almost like seasteading kind of vibe, you know, but of like these intentional, like this secession, you know, but it's like at what point is it going to be this vibe where like these communities have their own laws, you know, like actually like your own governance.
Yeah.
And it's like you're going to be like you're part of like the certain crypto community, like nation or whatever, sovereign nation online. Physically though, your neighbor to the right of you is living under a completely different set of laws. Like how's that gonna, you know what I mean? Like I don't know.
Right. Well, one quick comment on that, and then I want to answer Sam's larger question about the purpose and the real dream or function of these tokens. Charlie, I think it's way less kind of like dorky libertarian seasteaders than you might think. I mean, I don't
think that's dorky. That shit's kind of tough. I just don't even, you know.
I think it's kind of dorky.
Is it? I mean,
this new moment of crypto is way more hipster and fashionable than any of the old kind of like libertarian and seasteading. If you look at the people who are really crushing it with this, it's like really hip people. It's like, do you guys know Trevor McFedries? He's the guy who made Lil Miquela, you know, that AI influencer.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I've seen that or that name around, but I don't know.
Yeah, he's cool. He's super cool. He's like an entrepreneur and an artist, and and he's like a black dude. He's like a fashionable, good looking dude. And he's like super into one of his tokenized community. It's called Friends with Benefits, is one of the most successful. And it's one of kind of my role models in this regard. Like I was looking at people like him where I was like, oh, this is actually really chill and it works. And it's like, he's doing it and it's cool. So that's just one little caveat. And there's a bunch of other people like this. Is in part you're seeing also with the NFT craze right now, like because NFTs are kicking off right now, the people that are doing it are like a totally different type of person now. And it's way more kind of hipster people, fashionable people, whatever. In response to Sam's question, like, where does all of this go really? What's the appeal of tokenization? Honestly, the thing that most excites me about it, and the reason why after I looked into it, I was like, okay, I'll give this a go. Why not? Is really it's the idea of equity, sharing equity in the project with supporters and fans. Like, so I'm on Patreon, and honestly, I don't love it. Like I don't particularly want donations from people who support me. Like ideally, it's very clear to me that it's like, if you fuck with me and you want to throw me money to help me grow my shit, you should ideally see some upside in that at some point. And I don't particularly want like donations. It's like, if you think I'm good and you like me, then help me. And then as I grow, you should gain in some way. And at the moment, it's impossible to do that without like raising, that's basically like raising venture capital or whatever and getting shareholders or whatever. But tokens basically are a kind of informal way of doing this in a way. Now, you're not allowed to claim that it's a security, because then you break laws related to like unregistered security. So my token is not a security, and I wouldn't frame it as such. But in a way, it is a kind of informal way in the long run of getting to that type of thing, possibly, because the idea is, right, if you instead of just giving me like $5 a month on Patreon, what if you give me $5 a month, and each month I give you a certain amount of life coin that is equivalent to that. And then like the longer you support me, the more you have of this thing that should rise in value as I rise in value. And that is the really, really cool thing that excites me. Like I don't particularly want donations. I want if people fuck with me, I want to bring them into my fold, and I want them to be a part of a larger thing that they benefit from supporting me. And that's what excites me the most, because we don't have that at the moment.
So the tokens that are specific to these communities, at what point do they come to be able to be bought and sold and traded through like Coinbase or something with other cryptocurrencies like, Ethereum or Bitcoin or whatnot, or do they?
Yeah, well, Coinbase is a little tricky because that's a big exchange. So you have to have like a massive market cap before you'll be on Coinbase. So, but the larger point of your question is just, at what point do these currencies have like market value and you can buy and trade them openly? And that's not a hard thing to do, actually. So I'm preparing to do that with mine soon. So the way you do it is on Uniswap, which is like an open exchange. So any ERC20 token on Ethereum, you can basically just put it on Uniswap, as you list it on Uniswap. And then what you do is you have to build a liquidity pool, is what it's called. And so Uniswap is an automatic market maker, basically. So all you do is like you get a few people to basically stake their Ether or whatever in the pool. And pretty much if you get a few people to say, all right, I'm going to put 3 Ether into this pool. I'm going to put 3 Ether into this pool. I'm going to put 3 Ether into this pool. And what that means is like, they're just going to let it sit there. They're not going to touch it. But because they're letting it sit there, it can be exchanged for life. So in other words, they could, if they wanted to, pull it all out, or I could cash out my life for some of that Ether because it's just sitting there, right? But if I don't cash out my life, even though I could cash it out, that's a sign of, oh, this is genuine value, because I'm holding it, right? So you can do that all through Uniswap with no third party, really. You just need some number of people to stake Ether or some other form of value in the pool. And then basically you can kind of deduce from that amount of money in the pool, you can deduce the actual market price, and people can buy and sell in and out of that pool, basically. So anyone can do that. That's a totally open protocol. So I'm going to do that soon. So soon we'll know the market value of life. It's kind of crazy, but it's cool.
So there's a really interesting parallel between what you're describing with the currency, and its what it produces structurally in terms of your community, which is something not unlike, what you referenced, getting VC and building up a company and, having shares and going public, right? It produces something that performs that structural function, but that is accessible to somebody without those resources, right? And there's a really interesting parallel between that and like similar in a sense, what you're doing with like the courses and indie thinkers, in that you don't have the endowment or whatever to create a university and offer certificates, but the advent of the internet allows you to create something structurally that performs aspects of what those things perform. And so it becomes this issue of like access in a sense, right? Like, and here's where I'm going with that. Somebody with really off the radar ideas who has an interest in extremely arcane subject matter that would not ordinarily attract the interest of people who could put up VC capital or could, or who operate a hedge fund or who have an endowment or something, can interact with the world in the way that those people do, using these new systems that are sort of brought to us courtesy of the internet. I mean, does that resonate with you, what I'm saying?
Yeah, totally.
Okay. Interesting. So we've covered a lot of ground here, man. So I want to just put the question.
That just sounds right.
I want to just put the question to you that is the like title of this episode. Oh, wait a minute. You guys might not be getting me. There's a little freeze here for a second. Yeah. Are you guys hearing me now? Sorry. I think we froze for a second.
You're breaking up, man. Yeah. I can't.
Yeah.
Okay.
Now you're good.
Okay, so the question that's at the center of this episode is the internet a real place? So because you've got your community, you've got your classes, you've got your currency, you've got this like outreach that you do. It strikes me, this is why I invited you on the show. It strikes me that you achieve a dimension of placehood. So what do you think? Is the internet a real place?
I think this is one of those questions that where the pretentious answer is actually the true one, which is I'm really tempted to give you something kind of Baudrillardian here. I think I'm inclined to say the internet is absolutely it's a real place, in part because it's faker than fake. It's kind of falser than false, and it makes it more real than anything else we have in a way. I think these physical brick and mortar buildings that are associated with these traditional mainstream institutions, on the one hand, they feel realer than real, right? Like what could be more real than walking onto Harvard Yard, right? And seeing those beautiful buildings that have stood the test of time, to walk through those brick and wood paneled libraries. What could be more real than that? And yet, when you traverse those institutions, I've been to these places. I'll never forget the first time I was invited to give a talk at Oxford. It was like walking onto the campus. My train ticket was paid for. It was all paid for. It's an invited talk. I'll never forget the feeling of like, wow, I've really, really made it. This is the apotheosis of kind of real validation from the powers that be, as much as I ever could have hoped for. And yet the reason I'll never forget it is because we'll leave it, at the end of the day, like leaving home on the train, I honestly had this like very, very deep, sad, kind of twisted feeling of like, none of this is as I expected. It's kind of
can't. You're talking about going back to real brick and mortar shit after. Anyway,
Yeah.
I'm back. Sorry, man.
I need to get back to playing shows though, man. Dude, I've been loving this internet, dude.
Oh yeah, it's gonna be so fun. Yeah. So you want me to resume? Are you recording again?
Yeah, I'm back. It's recording. Sorry about that. So you were saying you were on the train home.
No worries. All right.
And you had this twisted feeling.
Yeah, I remember. I'll pick back up. Yeah, I was saying that. Give me one sec. You're gonna have to edit this probably now, but
It's okay.
Right. You look at somewhere like indiethinkers.org. Like I said, the website's not even particularly nice. It's just like, wait, actually, how long ago did I lose you? Do you want me to back up a little bit more?
You were on the train home from Oxford and you had this twisted feeling.
Okay, good. I'm glad I asked because that means you missed a little bit of what I was saying. Right. So yeah, I'm on that day. I'll never forget it because I'm going home at the end of the day thinking to myself, you got to be kidding me. Just like, I felt like it's like in the Wizard of Oz, you know, when they get to the end of the yellow brick road and they peek behind the curtain and it's like, there's not much there, you know, it's rather dramatic, but it really did feel like that in my traversal through academia. And so when you compare that to these weird little niche things I'm experimenting with and building on the internet, it's like, you know, it's easy to look at somewhere like indiethinkers.org and be like, you know, like the website's not even nice yet. It's like super minimalist. It's not flashy. I'm not really hyping it yet. I've been like building and working on the product and making it a better and better experience for everyone and growing it for the whole past year. I haven't even had time to like make it look nice or present it to the public in a very compelling way. It just grows through like slow internal word of mouth. And you look at something like indiethinkers.org and you're like, this is not real. Like, this is no big deal. This is not going to change anything. It doesn't matter. This is like a little LARP of academia or something like that. And this is what I mean though, when I say that the internet is faker than fake or it's falser than false in a way that somehow mysteriously ends up being more true than anything else, because just like, you know, the brick and mortar buildings of prestigious academia end up actually being fake in a way that is kind of heart-wrenching. It's the opposite. It's inverted when it comes to the internet. Like, everything on the internet looks fake, seems flimsy. This is all digital. This is pales in comparison to real life interactions or relationships. But then you traverse it, you go a little bit deeper, you actually get to know people, and you actually realize that the falsity of it or the flimsiness of the internet and digital relationships is really just a portal that through which if you actually do go all in on it and you actually, you know, give yourself over to what seems like this kind of fake, flimsy, you know, second life, you actually start to realize, oh wow, okay, this opens up onto a more real possibility than anything I've ever found in brick and mortar prestige institutions. And so it's kind of similar, I think, to what I was saying before about how it's kind of paradoxical, but the courses that I do actually end up being better because they lack certain things. I think you see this type of structure across these new kind of internet experiments where precisely because it's a fake, you know, secondary alternative to mainstream reality, it's able to actually pack the realest punch ever of any kind of currently operating system in a way. And maybe I don't have a perfectly clear mental model of how or why exactly that works, but that does seem to be the case to me. So I would absolutely say the internet is a place, and it's the best place I know of yet. It's the best place I've ever been. I think the internet is the best place I've ever been, because the falseness of it or the vacuity of it becomes its own canvas, where if what you're committed to is building something real, then you can build what's real with more aggression and energy and persistence and forcefulness than you can in the so-called real world. So That, by the way, is the other life too. That's exactly what the other life refers to. The true life is always an other life. It's always somewhere else. This mundane life that we live for real, is actually, it's always a kind of false life. It's a shadow of what real life is, and one's true life is always enough. And I think the internet occupies the space or the site of that other life, and that's, I think, where I would come down on that question.
Could I ask also, or I mean, it's one specific question, but just to bring up, like, I was interested and surprised to hear you say, man, that you were possibly gonna that you saw the other life and your what you're doing, your project online, that it might be a pivot point back to brick and mortar institutions that are based in the sort of greater, the more truthful sort of culture that you're cultivating. And it's kind of like, I mean, the fact that traditional institutions are physical places, that's not what makes them Stalinist hellbent of lies. I mean, you know what I mean? So it's interesting. And I also remember when I did your show a year ago, I remember you saying, like, yeah, I've been thinking of, you were asking me about touring, and you were like, I've been thinking about doing like a book tour for my book. Like, is that worth doing? And I was like, I was kind of surprised to hear you say that, because I'm like, when it comes to music, it's like being out of the performing game for a year. It is crystal clear what I've lost. Like, it's just castration. Like, it's the darkest. Like, music has got to be. I mean, live performance is, indispensable. But yeah, I don't know how, like, returning to the physical world. Like, why do you even feel the need to do? Or it doesn't sound like you feel a real need to. But like, why is that even on the radar of the trajectory?
Just because it's fun. It definitely does have certain aspects that in which it is superior, for sure. Yeah. So it's just fun and it's cool. And it's probably for the same reason you prefer performing than not performing in real life. So yeah, I don't think there's anything too profound there. I think it's just really cool to hang out with people and see how they move, see how they look, see how people walk and talk. Like, it's just, especially with the pandemic, it's like, I've never appreciated how fun it is and how cool it is to just be hanging with people in a place. And and actually, a shout out. I think I'm gonna do a talk at Sam's place in New York City eventually. We're gonna make it happen one way or another as soon as it's possible. So,
at H0L0?
Yeah. So nice. Shout out there for the coming Other Life podcast live show at H0L0 in New York City sometime soon.
Oh, that'll be cool. That'll be cool. Yeah. I mean, ideas are always a little more disembodied, though, right?
Yeah, but it's just fun to meet people. It's not profound, it's just fun to meet. Like, if what's cool about the internet and digital technology is that you can create things with extraordinary specificity and refinement and attract, you only need like who are interested in something, and you can pull them from all over the world, right, onto the internet. So the internet, digital technology is extremely powerful, especially for people in small niches interested in obscure stuff, because you only need a few hundred people scattered among like the 7 billion people in the world. You only need a few hundred, and there's a few hundred you can find on almost any topic or anything that you're interested in. And digital technology is a way to get them all in the same room, right? So digital technology is unparalleled for that, amazing for that. But once you're there and you have that interesting thing going and brewing and stewing, it's just inevitable. It's not profound, or there's no like, particularly theoretical observation here. It's just natural. If you like each other and you vibe and you're doing stuff that's cool and you're into, and you have a culture, you have a subculture or a community, you're just inevitably going to want to meet. And that's where I'm at. That's where I'm at with indie thinkers. Like, I just know people are going to love hanging out, and it's going to be so fun and cool. And the event that I did in LA, for instance, like the first ever live show I did for the Other Life podcast, last year, right before the pandemic, right before lockdowns kind of started. It's probably one of the last events people did actually in LA. It was awesome. It was awesome. Like, to this day, people still talk to me about it. It's just like a natural thing. You're going to want to, if you have something real on the internet, you're going to want to bring it into physical spaces eventually. Why wouldn't you?
Well, that was the shit I was so dark about missing. That's what I thought you were going to say was the craziest. I mean, with no, that was crazy and cool for sure. But it wasn't as like
I gave the story I gave because it was just kind of weirder and kind of more on point, I think, for you guys in like DIY spaces and stuff like that. I mean, the Other Life live show was a DIY too, but in a way that kind of felt like all according to plan. It was like it was epic in a lot of ways, but it wasn't the weirdest or the craziest because I felt like it happened how it should have and it came together how it should have. Yeah.
Word. So Justin, I want to just tell you something that maybe you'll find interesting, because my project Hollow, I approach in almost the exact opposite way that you describe, in the sense that Hollow is about, I mean, Hollow has a very, very consistent and like clear and clean way of presenting itself online that gives very little away about what it is, which is totally intentional. It's definitely meant to beg more questions than it answers in terms of our visual presentation online. But what it is in like real time is something that's based entirely on like what I would call an aesthetics of proximity, in the sense that we work with what is here, and like we work with who is here. And if someone comes in and does something and it goes reasonably well, and then they recommend somebody, then we work with that person, and we just try to be here for who's here. And then and actually we have a relatively low kind of a barrier to entry. You know, like it's not this hyper curated, refined, you know, we're chasing this very specific dynamic or aesthetic. It's actually very much not like that. It's like we're casting a wide net. We're here, we're a resource. If you're also here, come fuck with us and let's see what that adds up to, like socially and aesthetically. And it's interesting because, and I especially felt this during the pandemic, there are certain advantages to working in that way, because I mean, I'm in New York City, so there's a lot here, you know, and I think that a lot of New York City venues closed themselves off to a lot of amazing shit that's happening in New York. And I think that that's a shame. However, the manner in which you're talking about these affinity groups online kind of transitioning back over into physical space, it's a really interesting thing about Hollow. But because we work with so many communities, and because we have this very like a specific commitment to any particular dynamic or anything like this, in a sense, we don't have a community. What we have is this like plethora of probably 200 different actors that we work with, who all relate with us independently from one another in different ways. But trying to make that like add up to something, like we do an annual festival, and then so we try to like harness it all at once and turn that into like one experience, is like a constant challenge. I don't know, just hearing what you're describing about, you know, creating these affinity groups online, or maybe affinity group is not the right word, but creating these organizations online that then have the potential to transition back into physical space. I'm creating something almost only out of physical and social space that then gets put online, but then taking it as from the point of view of like promoting something online back into physical space, it kind of doesn't work. It's like because physical social space is so fractious, like, and in a way that has something to do with the internet, because everybody is more plugged into these online groups that they feel that they're a part of than they are plugged into the actual physical and social space that they exist in.
I think it makes sense that doesn't work for you in a way, because I mean, the question I would have for you is like, why even bother with the internet then? If you're so kind of place specific and it's so about this aesthetics of proximity, I think there's a case to be made that in your case, there's just no need for the internet. I mean, because the internet is what the internet's real power is, being able to both create and share content at scale, and to bring into one's or a much wider net at scale, right? So like if that's not the goal, or you're not doing that, then then it's not clear why you would even really need or want the internet.
Also, I'm not sure what you mean by not working, Sam, because people come to those events, man. I mean, people. I'm Hollow's packed when I go there, so I don't know what actually what you meant by what aspect is not.
Well, that's
working.
what I mean. Like he doesn't need the internet.
Yeah.
Right. Like, I guess what I mean is like when people are making use of our space, it works, right? But if we try to harness our Instagram following or harness our newsletter and present one thing to everybody that follows Hollow, like everybody that follows Hollow is such a grab bag of people from like all over social and cultural space that like, if we're like, hey, Hollow followers, here's this, that only ever appeals to like 15% of them at a time. Do you see what I'm saying? Because our social and physical approach is so heterogeneous. Do you follow what I mean? Like it becomes hard to harness. It's an interesting problem. And it's one that I'm actually happy to have because it gets to the heart of what's interesting to me about having a space and organizing. But it's also interesting to hear about a cleaner transition from online spaces into physical space.
No, it's true. And I do suspect that actually things don't work both ways symmetrically. Like if you can build an internet community that's thriving, you're sure as hell going to be able to get those people in the same space and they're going to have fun and it's going to be sweet. But if you can get a physical IRL community thriving, it doesn't necessarily at all follow that you're going to be able to translate that into any kind of robust or thriving internet community or even internet like presence necessarily, unless you also had an ongoing kind of secondary parallel project or creative track that is more germane to the internet, more specific to the internet. And that's how I would think about it if I were you. Like I think that's kind of more interesting. Like, can you write and speak and produce on the internet for the internet in a way that resonates with and for the internet, and that brings people into the world, that brings people into your orbit, who then inevitably just want to come check out the space and participate in the physical space. But then in a way, maybe you can't because you're all about this kind of aesthetics of proximity. So I see what you're saying as this being a kind of interesting research question for you, because given your kind of ethical and artistic and philosophical commitments there, it does make it an extra thorny problem, I think, for building an internet presence. But it's an I agree with you that it's an interesting problem to try to solve.
Yeah, word. Well, Justin, man, we've covered a lot of ground. Charlie, you got any last thoughts?
No, this was great. This was absolutely great. I didn't have any particular things I needed to get in there. I'm happy to be the Artie Lang of the third, the third mic.
Thanks, guys. It's fun.
Yeah.
Justin, thanks for coming.
Great
on the
to chop
pod,
it up, man.
And we'll be in touch.
Totally. Glad to talk with you guys. Thanks for inviting me. I appreciate your interest.
All right, man.
All right. Peace, Justin.
Later on.
Peace, man.
All right. Whoa, deep dive. Jay Murray, deep character.
This is a great one.
He had a line in there about colleges and unsustainable reign of lies and deception.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah.
Pretty real. Yeah, it was really deep to build with that dude. I will say, he came out and said the internet is a real place. I don't know that I 100% disagree. That I 100% agree. But the amount of stuff that dude has going on does kind of achieve this dimension of placeholder.
Yeah. I mean, it feels like a place that you can go. I don't know. I'd even, ahead of time or after the fact or during the thing, I don't have a clear sense in my mind of what feels like a place to me. Like, I'm not even sure I have a clear personal thing of like, what is a place? I was surprised that he had any interest though in like brick and mortar anything, because he was like, yeah, the internet's like definitely a place, but he still seemed to have some love for physical places in their own
right
specificity. I thought that was cool.
He said that he thought that these communities that are forming online would kind of congeal back into, and then be like kind of imported back into physical space.
Yeah.
That was an interesting part of the thing.
Yeah.
Anyhow, Charlie, thanks for being here, man.
Yeah, dude, thank you for having me. It was great.
Yeah, 100%. So, Place of Assembly podcast, Hollow NYC, Experimental Sound Studio, Chicago, and 8 Ball Radio. We'll see you next week. We'll be looking at next week starts a 3-part series on culture, arts, and organizing in Eastern Europe. Next week, we'll be talking to 3 different venue operators from 3 different cities in Slovakia. So turn up, check us out. All right, Charlie, we're out.
Right. Thanks, Sam.
All right, later, everybody.
Good, man.